Hi everyone, welcome to our another episode of DataBulls podcast. Today we are diving into one of the most critical topics in AI, governance and digital trust. Today AI is transforming industries from automating businesses process to shaping decision making. But with this power comes significant challenges, especially around privacy, ethical risk, and transparency. So, how do we ensure AI is used responsibly? How can businesses navigate evolving regulations while still fostering innovation? Are still strong questions, and we trying to answer these questions in overall today. To break all of this down, we joined by Punit Bhatia, a leading expert in AI governance and digital trust. Punit, welcome. Great to have you here. We before we get into details and our questions, can you please introduce yourself to our audience and share a bit about your journey into this field, and maybe you can give information about fit for privacy.
I've been in this area or in this field for about 25 years now. And what I do is I help companies in identifying and establishing a strategy and then a policy and then implementing that policy in context of AI and privacy. So I set up this company called Fit for Privacy, and we help simplify the data protection and AI regulatory landscape. So we help on fractional basis. We engage on specific project, task, or period that a client requires, and we are based on three pillars. So one is foundation. So we help do the groundwork, like setting up a long-term approach, defining a policy, setting up the governance. So the groundwork that is needed in areas like privacy and AI. Second, we also do the implementation. So we work with the colleagues to ensure that policies are implemented, governance is held, and we become their privacy office or part of the privacy office. If they don't have a privacy office, we are the privacy office. And third, we train. So we empower them to become knowledgeable and learn about privacy and AI. So we provide bespoke, that is custom made or ISO based trainings for their staff and members. That's what we do. And yes, I also have a podcast just like you guys, the Fit for Privacy podcast. And I had the pleasure of having Gokhan once. So yes, that's about me in brief.
We can start with the fundamentals. AI just is not just another software innovation. It's fundamentally changed how we process and analyze data, but also it means new challenges, particularly when it comes to privacy. And Panit, in your opinion, what makes AI a unique challenge for data privacy compared to traditional data processing methods?
I think I would classify, I mean, we can go into many directions, but I would stick to three things. One is the, what do you call the speed at which AI processes data, because it processes data very fast. And second is the vast amount of data, the scale of data that it processes. And third is the explainability, which is basically lack of explainability. So it processes large amount of data very quickly without us understanding what is it doing and how is it doing. That creates a lot of doubts, a lot of challenges in terms of how privacy is being respected, what is being done, what is not being done. And then these models are autonomous eventually, and that makes it even more scary for people. So the biggest privacy challenge is the lack of explainability, given the scale, given the vastness of data that is being processed.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because AI operates on massive data sets, learning patterns and making predictions that even developers might not fully understand, right? And that's where the risks really come in. and especially when we talk about the data leakage and rate identification. So we've seen cases where anonymized data was later reconstructed and revealing personal details. So, what are some of the biggest risks businesses should be paying attention to when it comes to artificial intelligence and personal data protection?
I think what happens is, as you rightly said, AI processes data, and AI processes large amount of data. Now, all data is not same. Some of the data is personal data. Some of that personal data is sensitive data. But unless we make this algorithm, or the developers make this algorithm in such a way that it differentiates between personal data, sensitive data, and the normal data, and also many other types of data, let's call it data classification. Unless and until it classifies and treats each data differently, it is going to remain a big risk. Because if we treat personal data as data and start processing it without consent, then we are creating challenges in terms of compliance with the law. So it will collect data from all sources. And if it is not protected, meaning the personal data, now that data may be leaked. And if that data is leaked, then we are already having a data leakage issue.
Yeah.
But on the same token, AI also matches data. So that means something I anonymized or I pseudonymized and put it on the web as non-personal data, it has the capability, we are not saying it will do it, but it has the capability from another source, if it picks up the personal data elements and matches it, and it will re-identify. So the re-identification possibilities, which we used to say previously, especially in context of non-AI systems, we were saying, okay, I've anonymized or pseudonymized my data and it's safe, because we were looking at it from normal algorithms. But with AI and the capacity and the capability that it has, that risk accentuates. So there is a risk of this re-identification. The second risk is also the data leakage, because let's imagine I pseudonymized or anonymized the data and put it on the web. Now, for me, in normal circumstances, it was safe. But with the matching, with the mixing of data and the speed at which it will process the data, what will happen? It will not only re-identify data, it will put it on the web. And now when it's put on the web, what has happened? There is a data breach or data leakage,
Yeah.
which was not expected. And this developer may be still thinking of the outcome they are looking at, but behind the scenes, they have created a lot of data on the web, and that is a data leak. So there are risks like this which are being created on a daily basis, and that's what we need to mitigate on an ongoing basis.
Yeah.
I
But
have a question, Demra, here
of
for
course,
Punit.
of course, yeah.
Okay. Now we are talking about personal data and it is risk of its leakage. By the way, we also have some bias problems.
Bias is definitely an issue, but I see the bias is an outcome. Bias is not an issue by itself. Bias is an issue in the data that you have fed it. If your data set was not holistic, if your data set was not 360-degree and not complete, then what you are doing is you are training your AI algorithm on a subset of the actual data. Now that subset of that data may be biased based on the situation, based on the gender, based on whatever. So you have given it a partial set of data. Like let's take that famous case of Amazon, wherein they introduced this, what do we say, AI-based algorithm to scan profiles and choose it in their hiring process. Now, they gave it the data of current employee set. Now, we all know we aim for equality. We want that there be gender equality and racial and every kind of equality. But we also know that is not there. That is not what we have in each organization. That's an aspiration. So your current data does not reflect the aspiration or the ideal data set that you want to have. So what would you feed? You would feed the employee data. Now that employee data has a certain percentage in which, let's say, women are less and men are more, just to keep the example same. And then also the origin of those people is very different. If you are looking at in Europe, there are more Europeans. If you're looking at America, there are more Americans. If you're looking at Asia, there are more Asians. So that means there is a bias already in the data. It's just the quality of the data we have. Now, these are inherent characteristics of data that has been fed, and that's how the natural data set is. So what will happen if the AI algorithm is not written in a way to counter these, what do you say, uh, inefficiencies or inaccuracies of that data, or bias in that data? It will build that bias into its logic or in its processing, because it will say, okay, let's take an example. There are 20% women and 80% men. So it will think, when I'm processing, I have to match that balance. I have to only allow 20% of women to be going through the hiring algorithm. And same way, let's say in Europe, European versus non-Europeans, it will say, okay, I have to have 90% Europeans and 10% non-Europeans. So it will start to process like that. So now we say there's an issue, but was it the issue of the algorithm? Was it the issue of AI, or was it the issue of the data? I think there are two issues. The data is an issue, and the second issue is the algorithm. So algorithm and data, if they are fixed, there won't be any bias. But yes, in most situations that we are facing, bias comes because of the situation. But the AI is situation agnostic, or say data agnostic. It just feeds the data, interprets it, and makes a conclusion. So for me, bias is definitely an issue, but it has to be solved at two levels: the data level and the algorithm level. If you know at algorithm level that there can be this segregation of data or bias in data, you can train it to say, I expect you to find this, but please ignore, because my target is to have equality in this area. If you tell that, you will not have an issue. That's how I see it.
Thank you. And I have another question. It will be about legislation. Can you share some insights? How can organizations align AI systems with evolving privacy laws like GDPR or DORA, more focus on information and communication technology resiliency while fostering innovation?
That's a very good question. I think there are two approaches that one can take. One is the standard traditional approach of, okay, now there's GDPR, let's comply with GDPR. Now there is DORA, let's comply with the DORA. Then there's the EU AI Act, let's comply with EU Act. But that is not sustainable, because then you're always running these projects. And for an organization, you're putting regulatory as the highest priority, but that regulatory budget is getting is consuming significant amount of your overall organizational business budget or investment budget in IT. So all that effort is going into compliance. Instead, what I suggest and I promote is, what you do is you look at your compliance from a long-term perspective. Say, okay, what are the regulations or legislation you have to comply with? Then say, why are these regulations there? Why is DORA there, NIS2 there, or this GDPR there? Because there is a trust issue. Because previously, 50 years ago, 100 years ago, you and me were talking in a coffee corner.
Yeah.
And we didn't have these means, the Zooms, the Google Meets, the Teams, and all those things. So there was a trust. I want to meet you. I don't want to meet you. I want to see this video. I don't want to see this video. The video was not there. So it was only the TV. Now, today, everything is digital. And in the digital world, I have so many options. Do I go to this channel? Do I go to this website? Do I buy, like banking? You had maybe 4 or 5 or 10 banks in Turkey. Now here, like in Belgium, we had 4 or 5 banks. But now there are non-Belgian banks or non-European banks who are offering services, fintech. Now, do I trust them? Can I put my money there? The question is, what am I asking inherently? Can I trust them? But the trust is then the digital trust. Can I trust in the digital presence of these companies? Because I know everybody's innovating. And then if you want to create the digital trust, now regulators don't know how to do it, or government doesn't know how to manage it. One time somebody says privacy, so they bring GDPR. Second time they say AI, so they bring EU Act. Third time somebody says resilience, they bring DORA. That's how they're working, and they're doing their best. But inherent message behind is, we want to create digital trust through all these digital regulations, or data regulations, as we rightly call it. So from an organization perspective, why not look at creating a digital trust framework and saying, we are going to look at different aspects: privacy, risk, ethics, security, you name it, and you have it, maybe 6 to 8 parameters. And then holistically in each one of those, you define controls, and then you implement it. And behind it, you create a policy. Maybe you will need 5 or 6 policies: the privacy policy, the security policy, the ethics policy. But end of the day, everything is linked. And from a employee perspective and even a consumer perspective, it's easy to say, okay, these are my issues, this is how it's being handled. But then in a compliance landscape, I would have one training called digital trust training. Not I have a privacy training, I have a security training, I have phishing training, I have this training. Of course, you may need some trainings, but you will not have as many as today. So I would say organizations need to simplify, but either way, whether you take approach one, regulation by regulation, or the digital trust approach, it's a choice. There are 3 simple steps: define the objective and convert it into a policy. So create a policy, set up the governance, and then measure and monitor the compliance with the policy. Initially, you need to have an implementation, but afterwards, you need to control it. That's essentially what you need to do: define a policy, set up a governance, and manage the implementation or ongoing implementation.
Thank you,
Thank
Punit.
you, Punit. At that time, Gökhan, I just want to ask a special question because it's related to business actually. And, in the world, this competition is going to harder and harder. And regulations, we talk about regulations, just not compliance, but there are also regulations, right? So regulations also shaping the global competitive landscape. So we are seeing very different approach from major players like United States, which is leaning toward a more flexible industrial-led approach. And when it comes to China, which has taken a more centralized government control stance on AI governance, right? So this divide creates an interesting challenge for businesses that operate internationally. So a company that builds AI solutions in United States may have rethink its entire compliance strategy when entering the Chinese market and vice versa. So meanwhile, the European Union is pushing this for strict AI regulations that could set a global precedent, but might also slow down AI adoption for European businesses compared to their American and Chinese counterparts, right? With these competing frameworks, do you think businesses will struggle to develop artificial intelligence models that work across different regulatory environments? And if so, could this regulatory divide create even bigger trade tensions between these global AI powerhouses?
I think there are many questions in one question, but it's a very good question. Let's look at it in pieces. Yes, there are many regulations, and the regulatory landscape in each continent, or rather even in each country except for the EU, is very different. And sometimes it's strict, sometimes it's called innovation centric, but it's not innovation centric. Do you want innovation to be irresponsible? Do you want innovation to be against society? No, nobody wants that. So the only difference is in some regions, we are saying, like the US, we expect the company to be responsible. But we've seen what happened in some election meddling and all those things, what has happened. So companies or people by nature want to do the good thing, but they do not end up doing the good thing because not every scenario can be forethought or can be foreseen before. So it's not an intention problem, it is the outcome problem. So to control that outcome, I think you need reasonable amount of regulation and guidance so that it remains safe for the society and safe for humans. So the intention needs to be backed up with some rules and some guidance, and that's where the regulation comes in. I'm against over regulation, but I'm also against no regulation. So there has to be the right amount of regulation, and that is responsible AI. That's why we call it. So if it is responsible AI, now the question is, how do you deal? Because each organization or each region has its own maturity and own approach. There, a company needs to take a stance saying, if you are wanting to be responsible AI and responsible company, then you set up out a policy, align it with the common minimum standard that you want to comply with, and then create your products. And when you're launching into a region, you review that in context of the applicable legislation in that region. Because at the moment, not too many countries have an AI legislation. A few have. So if you say, I will operate in countries which don't have a legislation, and it takes 3 to 4 years or 2 years for you to get to a product, an innovative product which you believe is more innovative and presumably more good for society and doesn't need to comply with the legislation, then by then you will have a legislation even in those countries. So what will you do? So if you start with that common minimum standard or call it a policy, you will have a chance that you are meeting the compliance requirements in those regions. And then, of course, if you're going into the highly or heavily regulated regions, there you will go a little extra mile in terms of compliance burden. Compliance burden meaning the record keeping and evidencing, but that you would have anyways done it. If you do the right thing, you would actually be complying with the regulation. Because I looked at this EU AI Act in detail. Except for conformity assessment, none of the requirements are out of the blue. None of the requirements. They're all practical. Should you do data governance? Yes, of course. Should you do testing? Yes, of course. Should you do risk management? Yes, of course. So should you have evidence that you did all these things? Yes, of course. Should you keep your steps and everything and explain it to the user in a responsible company? Yes. And if all those are yes, what is the EUA Act asking? To do it more thoroughly and in the conformity assessment, prove that you've done it. Now that conformity assessment is the big part, in my opinion.
That's great.
Punit, thank you for your explanation. As we know, users have very limited control over the AI processes their data. And for this, in this context, how can businesses strengthen consent mechanisms and data minimization practices?
It's not easy, but what you need to do is go back to the basics. When we talked about consent, the idea was you ask a granular consent. The problem is companies still look at macro consent. Let's take a practical example. I buy Alexa and I set it up, or I buy Siri and I set it up. Now, by downloading, I've given consent to a certain extent, or by buying, I've given consent to a certain extent. And when it's being set up, it can ask a few questions and I can give consent. Now that's consent how it's being foreseen right now, today. But then at a later point in time, few days later, I want to ask about the weather, or I want to ask a personal question about my health situation, saying I'm having some fever and so on. What medicine would you recommend? Now, in those specific situations, when I'm asking about weather, when I'm asking about the traffic, or it asks me, do you have an electric car or something, it's collecting my data. Because it can say, normally from here to wherever I'm going, it will take 2 hours, but depends, would you need to charge? Do you have an electric car? How much is it? So now it's collecting data. So there, we need to guide those algorithms to ask for consent, saying, hey, normally it takes 2 hours to get there. But if you want, I can give you more specific information based on the type of car you're driving. Would you need that information? So not automatically store and then ask me, should I store this information for future? So you don't have to ask, do you consent to store this information? Because there the user gets scared, but be in a normal conversational mode, whether on website, whether on Alexa or anywhere, and keep on asking that question rightfully and wrongfully. And then at a certain point, if I want, I can go back, and that's where it goes more challenging. I can see all the consents I provided in last 3 months and I can remove them. And that's where it goes. Like, I'll give you an example now in practical how I saw it working. In Google Maps or Google, you can store, it stores your history. So I'm a privacy savvy guy. I went in and said, I want to delete it every 6 months or 1 year. Then they have a very smart way of keeping the data. They sent me an email saying, your history is going to be deleted next month. Would you like to keep it? So I have a choice. But they are collecting data, I understand, but that's through my choice. So one, I had the option how long the data should be kept. Two, I'm also being prompted if I want to keep the history. And I was like, that would be interesting in 10 years if I know where I have been, which holidays I've done, and so on. Should I keep it? So you're prompting the user. So ask consent at the most granular level and collect data as it's necessary and give them as much empowerment as possible. So collect minimum data, ask consent as the questions are being raised, the interaction and the trust is being improved, and then people will choose. And then also make them understand the consequences of their choices. But in a granular way, not like I get the Google Maps or the Alexa, and on day one, I have 20 pages to read. Do I accept? Of course, I accept because I want to use it. That time, my intention is not to read the policy. But if you do it granularly at each and every step, every journey of it, like LinkedIn also does the same thing. In your messages, sometimes it prompts you, sometimes it say, to read messages like this, should I give you the AI-driven response? Now, it's a choice. It's not being imposed. And then, of course, then it says, if it says, right now I didn't see that, would you want me to learn from the customizations you're making? Then it's learning about my personality and how I write. But ask at the right time. So granular consent, but at the right time, and minimal data at the start, and an ongoing consent basis. Then, of course, having a consent manager which gives you all the consents you have given.
Punit, talking about the content, there isn't questions in my mind as an user, because as you explained, most of the people actually don't read privacy policies. For instance, me, and even we do, the language is kind of overly complex, right? And this creates a trust gap between me as a consumer and businesses. So to bridge this, I think it's not just my responsibility. Companies also need to vetting how they approach user consent, right? Maybe need to make it more clear, more transparent, and like easier to manage in real time, right? So data minimization is the key. So it's becoming a key priority, I think, and in ensuring that AI models only use that use the data that is absolutely necessary, rather than collecting everything just because they can. But the challenge is balancing privacy with functionality. And is there any way to business minimize data usage without compromising AI performance or user experience? Is a one question. Also, are there any practical ways that the companies can strengthen consent mechanism and then implement effective data minimization strategies while still delivering powerful AI-driven services?
I would say take the human interaction example and implement it in the AI. So if, let's say, two people meet, what
Yeah.
do? You say, who are you? How are you? And then over 10 or 20 conversations, or maybe a 1 hour conversation, they get to know each other better and better and better and better.
Yeah.
Now, what we do is, since AI, because we don't have the capability to do 10 hours of 10 meetings processing in 1 minute. So we don't do that. We say, okay, tell me everything about you. I'll plug the device in me, and I know everything about you. It doesn't work like that, right? So same thing for a computer or a AI system. Since the AI system can capture all the data about me, let's not start with everything. Start with the basic that it's needed to start the interaction, And as it builds that trust with the minimal data, and whatever direction I need to configure it, whatever way I need to configure it, you keep asking those questions and get to know each other over a period of time. But the problem with these AI systems is right now, people think, okay, as soon as I configure my Alexa, okay, Punit Bhatia, search on internet, make a profile of me, make an analysis of me, my psychology, my everything based on Facebook, and everything is now analyzed. Now that's not how humans interact. Okay, you see my Google profile, see my LinkedIn profile, but you make a small judgment. But then you let the conversation take place, let the engagement take place. So same thing, AI systems need to collect minimum data and not start processing everything around it immediately. Over a period of time, as needed, on need basis, you do it. The second part of the question was, how do you manage consent? I think the only way is granular consent and managed consent. So granular meaning at the right time and at the very basic and very step-by-step level. But second, you need to have something called privacy preferences or consent management somewhere in your settings wherein person can go and change his preference and at each and every step, and make it as granular as possible, as easy and possible, because the more granularity you give, the more data people will give.
There is one more question for our minds, that we need to learn, in your scope, what are the most critical AI-related privacy risks for the future? And what do you think about the prepare stage? For businesses, what role should risk and compliance and audit teams play in mitigating AI-driven privacy risks?
Sure.
Good
So
question.
risk, compliance, and audit, and any other team that's there other than the AI team, they tend to think that AI team will come to them. Well, that's one approach, but the better approach is that you don't sit, you go out and ask and say, I, as a privacy person, I, as a risk person, compliance person, have a role to play in your AI strategy, AI approach, AI execution, AI building, and please include me and get involved. So do not sit back and relax, rather go out, talk to people, connect, and get engaged with all the people who are developing these AI systems, creating these AI systems, approving these AI projects, and talk to them and say, privacy, risk, compliance have a role to play, and explain your role and get connected on each and every step. So don't sit back, be open and be proactive.
Okay, then, gentlemen, we have covered key challenges from balancing innovation with compliance to strengthening consent mechanisms, minimizing data risks, and ensuring AI-driven decisions are explainable and accountable. And global AI regulations taking different approaches. Companies need to stay agile, ensuring their AI systems align with multiple frameworks without stifling growth. And what clear is that AI is advancing faster than any regulation can fully keep up with. So businesses can't afford to take a wait-to-see approach, right? So those that prioritize their ethical AI and responsible data practices and long-term digital trust today won't just meet compliance standards. Also, they'll gain a real competitive edge. And Punit, I truly appreciate your insights and perspectives in this discussion, because it's very valuable cast for today. And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in this episode. If you found this conversation valuable, don't forget to follow us more deep dives into AI governance and emerging tech. And until next time, stay informed. But last, do you have any final words, Punit?
No, thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure to be here and have this conversation. I think the message has been clear. AI is here and AI will stay.
Yes.
And then privacy risk or compliance risk is real and something needs to be done. And it is up to all of us to take action and be part of the conversation in protecting data, and not only protecting data, but doing it in a responsible and ethical way. So let's not wait for the regulation and do it the right way.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Punit.
Punit.
Really enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you so much. I also enjoyed it. And as a joke, when we were talking about bias, you were also biased. You said, that was it, gentlemen. So you see, in the psychology, it is gentlemen, not gentlemen and ladies,
Yeah.
ladies and gents. So I was about to make a joke in the real one, but then I said, okay, I don't know how light the environment is in the podcast.
I'm learning from mechanisms. Yeah,
Yeah, so even the human intelligence is biased.
I think so.
Yeah.
That's why mechanism is also biased.
Yeah.
Thank you, Punit.
Thank you
Until next
so
time.
much, Demre,
See you.
and thank you so much,
Bye.
Gokan. You're a great friend.